again, everyone. I am Christopher Brannon with the Coeur d'Alene Public Library and the Cooperative Information Network.
And I'm George Williams. I'm the Next Search Catalog Coordinator from Northeast Kansas Library System, coming to you live today from Saturn, from Europa. See Saturn in the background there.
And I'm coming here to remind everybody to make sure that you attend our conference this year at Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And that is September 20th through the 23rd. And by the time this video gets out, we will hopefully have our presentation proposals in hand and start to have some sort of schedule that we can get online. But we hope to see everybody there, and we hope that we have plenty of great presentations to listen to. I'm looking forward to it. And today we are going to be talking about a beast of a report to look up, who has what kinds of permissions. Before we get into that, here's a brief message about koha-US.
This video is sponsored by koha-US, your place to look for all things Koha. Whether you're just starting out with Koha or you've been with Koha for a while, koha-US is a great place to find resources, learn new tips and techniques, or connect with other users and libraries. Koha-US provides excellent information, both original and curated from around the internet, including the terrific every other day training videos. You will also find several special interest groups to connect with, as well as our general monthly meeting where we gather to talk about the latest Koha news. You should also check out the koha-US annual conference, held at various locations around the US. This is a great opportunity to meet with other users face-to-face, and build your Koha network, as well as new friendships. And of course, don't forget about the great presentations. Koha-US is also actively involved in the Koha community by contributing towards new developments. If you are interested in contributing towards Koha-US funded developments, join the Koha-US membership. Your annual membership builds the funds to sponsor new developments in the community, and as a member, you also help shape Koha-US with your membership votes, and receive a discount on the annual conference. You can also contribute towards developments through a direct donation, or by purchasing some great Koha-US merchandise through our Threadless account. Visit us at koha-us.org to find out more.
All right.
So first, I wanted to mention before we got any further along that there was a Koha US system administrators meeting today, and Juliet, I forget which library she's at, mentioned, it's right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, she mentioned that she had used an idea from one of our videos. You came to the meeting late, so you weren't there for that part, but we had talked a few months ago about how to add the Koha close date calendar, the holiday calendar from Koha onto the front page, so that you always know when the next close date is at your library. And she had taken that idea, and instead of putting the calendar on there, she put in a report that helps them find materials in their materials sorter that have requests on them. So that way, whenever anything goes through the materials sorter that has a request on it, the report updates and staff can see that on the homepage at Koha, and they know to go fish that item out of the materials sorter. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
It's awesome to know that people actually watch and listen, and that we're not just talking to ourselves.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that the things that we're sharing are helpful. And
yeah.
If any of you have used any of the ideas from any of our videos, please let us know that you're utilizing that. We'd love to hear positive feedback about the things that we're sharing.
We'd like to hear negative feedback too. If you hate what we're doing, tell us what we're doing wrong.
But mostly we want to hear the positive stuff.
Yeah, I want to hear that. Yeah, I'd rather hear the positive stuff too. But if you really hate us and don't like what we're doing, let us know that too, so we can do even more of it.
All right. Well, as I said earlier, we're going to be talking about a report where we're looking at permissions that are set. You may have a small staff and you may have only a couple of users in your system that have permissions, but if your consortium, like what George belongs to or what I belong to, you may have hundreds of people that have permissions, and keeping that in check is very important. And so it's always good. We here at our consortium, we evaluate those things annually, and we look at who has permissions. Staff come and go, and you don't always get notified when somebody has left another library that you're not at, or you might have leftover permissions on an account that don't need to be there. Maybe they've become a regular patron, they're still in the system, but those permissions never got cleaned up. And so this is a good tool to use in order to find those and evaluate if they have everything that they need, if they have more than they need, if they shouldn't be in there at all. So we're going to show a couple of approaches that we've taken to doing this difficult task. And I say it's difficult because the way that this information is stored is not straightforward.
Yeah, it really gets kind of complicated. So here I'm going to go to one of my patrons that I've got as a test patron, and I'm going to go and view that account. And this is one of my Frosties. It's not a real person, so we're not giving away any secrets here. But if I go to set permissions, currently they're set as a super librarian. And if you click on on the show details button, there's a main permission, and then underneath that there are individual granular permissions that are, this is the circulate permission. If we check this, then that person has all of the different circulation permissions. But maybe we don't want them to have all of those. Maybe this is somebody that only needs to check things in and check things out. And we don't want them to be able to override things. We don't want them to execute the overdues report. We don't want them to manage restrictions. I have an account type like this that we use here called aid, and it's for volunteers. And so it's a really limited account. And so if you have one of these boxes checked where it's checking a whole bunch of permission or a whole bunch of sub permissions, the data for this upper level permission is stored in the borrowers table in Koha. But if you don't have that top level one checked, if you've just got these checked, these are stored in a separate table in Koha. And so it can really get confusing as to figuring out, these things. And to write reports.
You and I had talked a little bit about that. We're not exactly sure why this is separated the way it is. We're kind of speculating that initially we didn't have granular permissions, and so that just those categories were thrown into this number. And the number itself boggles my mind. Why they didn't use a code like they use everywhere else and store that information, I'm not sure. But because they were storing this in one field, maybe that's it. It was just simply they were storing what level of permission a person had as a number that built off of itself exponentially, so that they could store it in one place and they didn't have to have a separate table. But then as granularity was introduced, they decided, well, we need another table for that, and they didn't want to go back and rewrite everything for permissions. So
that's my best guess too.
We have two different ways of storing this information.
Yeah, it's a legacy issue with Koha that probably goes all the way back to Koha version 1.0. And I actually, this is a report that I wrote to show, this is how. So part of the permissions are actually written into the borrowers table. There's a column in the borrowers table called flags. And it is exponential, because if you have permission to use the patron clubs module, the way it works is Koha takes 2 to the 21st power, which comes up with this number, which is like 2,097,152. And it puts that number into the flags field in the borrowers table. And so if you have permission for lists and permission for clubs, it adds those two together. It takes 2 to the 20th power plus 2 to the 21st power, and it adds them together. And that's the number that appears in that flags column. And then Koha knows when it sees that unique number, because if you add any of these exponents together, there's no combination.
There's no overlap, no.
There's
error.
absolutely no way to get an overlapping number. There's no way that you can have 3 permissions that equal the same thing as maybe 4 different permissions. It's just mathematically not possible for these numbers to add, for any combination of these numbers, any 2 different combinations of these numbers to add up to the same thing. It's just not mathematically possible. But it gets really confusing, especially when you add in the fact that not only do you have to look at that borrower flags column, but then you also, if you just have a sub permission, then it has to look out at a different table. It gets really hard to write reports on this.
Yeah, it's genius in how it was developed so that they could use one field and one number, but it's, you know, it's maddening in every other approach. I mean, if you want to do a report on it, your report is not going to be simple, and that has complicated report writing on this tremendously. There have been a couple of different approaches to writing reports on that, and we're going to look at that now.
Yeah, I've actually got that pulled up. You know, we've got reports written about staff level permissions going back to, you know, this is one by Ian at Bywater Solutions that is probably Koha 2 point something, or maybe early 3 point something. I got one here by Nicole and Joy and Elliot at Bywater Solutions, and one by Tomas. And
yeah, a lot of these are old, because
a lot of these are very, very old.
They don't even have versions on it, and that's rather important, because as it's gotten more complex and there's more permissions, some of these reports may not show everything.
Yeah, and well, actually, this first one from Ian, these first couple ones, they don't show you what permissions a patron or user has. They're just showing you which patrons actually have permissions. And that's all it's
set.
Yeah, if anybody with any permissions is going to show up in one of these. So, and then we move on to one by you and Nick Clemens that I think is also a few years old. I think you guys might have worked on this one when Nick was still at Vocal.
Yeah, this was actually done when shortly after we had joined. We wanted to have a report on, you know, who has permissions. Nick figured out the formula on this. Dealing with the div. I never understood the div, but now I have a little bit more understanding, since you explained that the number was built as an exponent of the number 2. It's like, oh, okay, so this makes a little bit more sense, but still, you know, not as straightforward to me, but it is simpler in the way it's designed.
Yeah,
I think this report only does with the categories. It does not deal with the subs.
I am really not sure. Just looking at it, I can't.
Well, no, I see. I do see the group concat includes the
module bits.
Yes, but it is limited to the permissions of the time. I will say that.
Yeah,
this is not complete.
Based on that other report, this only goes up to this level here. So anything Any permissions having to do with lists or clubs or ILL or self-check or stock rotation aren't included in that report.
Yeah.
This.
And this is a very rudimentary
Yeah,
report. It just spits out information, and it's not formatted well. So this is an old one. In fact, it may be one that I decide to go and pull, because
at the very least, somebody should go in and put a version number on it.
yeah, I don't even remember what version it's for, frankly. So
Yeah,
that would be a hard
yeah,
one.
pulling it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And one of the things, so I started my work at Northeast Kansas Library System with this version of this report, I think. And then I went through and I built on it to get what I used for a long time. And it had that problem that we talked about before when we were talking about the circulation rules, is that the big problem I had with this report is that each permission is its own column. And so if we're up to 26, 27 different permissions, different top level permissions now, that gets you a table that's, I've got 3 screens on my desktop, and that's the kind of thing that you put it on all 3 screens, and then maybe you still have to scroll a little bit with 27, maybe 28 columns. That's a big, big wide table, and it's really hard to look at. It's really hard to read.
Yeah.
It's hard to follow with your eyes.
Yeah, the more permissions, the wider that table was getting. And yeah, if you used that now and you built on, you added all the permissions that have come out since then,
Yeah.
it's unruly.
And then at some point you updated this to a permissions check report. Still doesn't have a version on it, so I don't know how far back this goes. But it's the same thing where it's going to be really wide.
Yeah, that is one that I can see. I was using some old column names, check L, check E. I was labeling things a little oddly in my early SQL days. So it's really hard to tell what goes with what. My newer report, which will be added here later, is a little bit more straightforward and understanding. More complicated, but a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah, and that's the way I keep going is, I wanted to get away from those multiple columns, and we're in the middle. We're still, I know it's an ongoing process here where we're moving from libraries having like a director account and a circ account and a tech account to each person having an individual who has to log into Koha, having an individualized login. And so what I needed was a report that I could maybe look at 2 different patrons at a library to compare their permissions, and having that big spreadsheet was kind of getting to be a problem for me. And so that's when I wrote this thing, which is on the wiki, and it needs to be updated. This was for version 21.11, and we're about to upgrade here to 22.11.
Yeah.
So I'm a couple versions behind, but what I wanted to get to was a way of doing this so that it all comes out in just a couple of columns. And so this is my result from this report, which has got a borrower number, a user ID, a category code, and I've got it written so that I can run this for separate branches. So I can choose a library and just see the people that have permission at that one library. But that came in useful for doing this video, because this way I'm only showing you the staff at our digital library, which I can go ahead and delete all these patrons later. And I'm not breaching anybody's security because anybody's confidentiality, because all of this is, none of these are real people. But the way I've got this written is it's kind of a complicated bit of SQL, because I had to do a lot of concatenation to get all of that stuff into this one column. So the first thing I've got going on is I'm saying if the borrower flags mod 2, then call this column super librarian, and that's the end.
So that's
So
if it's doing super librarian if it's true, and then after that comma, if it's false.
if it's false, then it goes through this set of. Then it's gonna do all of this if it's false. And this report is kind of a long report. It goes on forever and ever and ever. But it's basically doing one thing. It's just doing it. It's just kind of looping through all the different permissions. So I'll break it down here, but let me go back to that report first. So this one is a super librarian. So what it's doing is it's saying, take the number represented by borrower flags, and if you divide that by 2 and there is a remainder, then that's true. And if there is no remainder, then it's false. And so if you do borrower flags mod 2 and there's a remainder, then it has to be.
If there's no remainder.
If there
Well,
if there is a remainder.
Okay.
If there is a remainder, see, every exponent of 2 has a remainder except 1. Or every exponent of 2 does not have a remainder. Oh, the math is killing me.
See why this is so hard for us.
I know, it's because we're not mathematicians, we're librarians. So every number here, every possible flag has no remainder except super librarian. That's the case we're looking for. So every possible combination there is no remainder except super librarian. That's what mod does.
Okay.
And so if this is true, if borrower flags mod 2 is true,
Has a remainder.
then it has to be super librarian.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then it's going to print super librarian, and it's going to ignore the entire rest of this if-then statement.
Okay.
But if borrower flags mod 2 is false, then it's going to cycle through the rest of this, and it's going to say, first I wanted something in here that would say library staff instead of super librarian. So, whoops, I want this one. So this person is a library staff member. They're not a super librarian, and they have circulate as one of their permissions. So circulate is the first one, and that's what this set of the if-then statement does. And so it's going to say, if mod, it's going to take borrower flags divided by 2. And if
then it takes that number and does mod against 2 after that.
Yeah.
So whatever the flag divided by 2, it'll mod that against 2.
Right. And if there is
a remainder.
Well, and actually this is using the backwards version of mod. There's 2 versions of mod. So this is saying, like I said, it's complicated. So in effect, what this is doing is it's saying if there's a remainder here, or actually when you write the mod this way with mod and then something in parentheses, if this is true, then it's going to say that we have all the circulation parameters. And if it's not true, then it's going to go on to this separate thing, and it's going to go over to the user permissions table, and it's going to look for module bit number 1, which is the circulation module bit. And then it's going to drag out all of the circulation sub-permissions that go with that possible, with the circulation permissions. So does that make sense?
Clear as mud.
Yeah, like I said, it's very complicated. And I did a double if then on this, because if it's all permissions, and I've got a patron here that has all permissions. So what I wanted is if the patron has if the user has all permissions, I wanted to say circulate, and I wanted to say all parameters. If they have only sub permissions, like this reserved for others, or edit catalog. Here's one, edit catalog. This person only has these 3 sub permissions from edit catalog. So in cases where, and here's a better one that says circulate. Circulate, they have remaining permissions. So they don't have the all parameters for circulate. They only have the circulate remaining permissions, sub parameter. And so that's what this complicated if then statement is doing from here to here. So it's saying if they have the all parameters flag, it's going to say circulation all parameters. If they have just sub permissions, it's just going to plug in the sub permissions. And if they don't have any sub permissions, or if they don't have that parameter and there are no sub permissions, it's just going to leave a blank space. And so that got me from a 28 wide table down to having all of this in one column, which is what I really wanted. That was my real goal. And I guess you've done something similar, but different.
Yeah, in fact, I was working on it because I needed to clean up our Koha demo instance on koha-US. I needed to see where we were with that, and it was overdue. I needed to update the report for our website or our Koha for our libraries as well. I knew that more permissions were in the mix since I last worked on this, and so it gave me an opportunity to refamiliarize myself with the code, because I don't like touching this stuff. It's hard to even talk about it.
The math is giving me a headache right now. It's after lunchtime here, and
the logic of the mod really throws me, and so that's why, since we did the report with Nick, and I don't have Nick to hold my hand through this report every time I touch it, I approached it a completely different way. So let me show you what I have. Here's the result of my report, first of all. So my report, it was the multiple columns, and I was looking at a way to condense it, and then you and I talked about it, and it turned into a possibility of this video. But when you showed me that, it's like, okay, that convinced me I can do this, and I did condense some things. So I have a lot of the same type of information, but I formatted it differently.
yeah.
So, and I stripped, I have in the official report, I'll have the last name and card number included with this as well. But because there is some people that are active on the system, I just wanted to whittle it down to something a little less sensitive. So, but the permissions, I kind of went the same route, but I formatted things a little differently. Just, I wanted the category to be on its own line, and to say whether it, on the next line, say whether it was all permissions or what sub permissions were listed under there if it wasn't all. So I think it's, I'm not trying to, poo-poo your report, but I think mine's a little bit more elegant in the way it displays it. So, and you'll notice that some of my categories are in red. I had had chose to highlight specific ones specific permissions I thought were kind of critical to know about. You know, if they're super librarian, or if they can log into the staff interface, if they could change permissions, or if they could change parameters. Those were critical to me. So I made sure that those particular elements stood out in red, and I had a little explanation next to that permission category,
Right.
just in case, to make that clear.
I like it, and I think I might steal it because it's a good idea.
You know, anything that you can do to help, you know, make a quick look quick, is a good report. My take on this approach is a little different. I have separated the way it formats in a select, and I have a select within the from that does all the logic, and instead of using the mods, what I'm doing here is, it starts from the top down. Yours goes kind of the opposite direction in checking.
Right.
I check a different way. So basically, it's starting from the furthest possible permission. And I do have one I think I have to add here for the 2211. But
yeah, I think you're missing the recalls permission.
well, I've got that one.
Oh, you've got that. It's the 2211 has
it's the
ERM. That's it.
So I'll probably update that before I put it on the SQL library, but I would just slip that in before this. So I have a little reconfiguring to do, but basically I'm just going by the raw number, and I'm checking if I'm throwing the flag into this. I call it a variable. You know, it's a way I've learned to do SQL reporting, but I call this @check. I throw the flag in there, and if that minus the largest number equals 0, then I'm considering that category is true, and so basically it means that that recall category, all of it is selected, not just a subcategory under there. So I call that true. Otherwise, I leave that variable blank, and I put that in a column called recalls main. So basically checking the main flag for that category. And then I'm doing a separate column that's checking the subcategories, and it's checking that upcode from the user permissions, and checking to see if the bit is set for that, and gathering all the categories, or the codes that are set for that, and it's sticking it in that column. So I'll do that, and then it's doing another check. It's if the check is greater than or equal to 0, it's setting the check to equal whatever that number is, minus that number. So it's basically trying to find out what the remainder is.
Right.
You know, I am not a math person. There's probably a more elegant way to do it. The mod seems to be a more elegant way, but it's very difficult for me to wrap my head around. So this made a little bit more sense. So it's taking a little bit more coding, but it's a little bit more straightforward to me as to what the logic is. And then it's reassigning that value. It's reassigning the check for the next set of lines. So basically it's just going through, the remainder. If there's any remainders, it's checking against each one, and then setting the main category is true if it's the whole category, or setting the values, the codes for the subcategories if those exist.
Right.
So doing all of that, going down through the list, and then, you know, ending with that check for the super librarian, and taking all of that. And again, that was a sub report within this from. And so this section up here is basically telling it what to do, how to format all that information. And so if, you know, like, for example, they have that, if the super is not blank, if that particular column is not blank, then okay, we've identified them as a super librarian. I'm highlighting that in red and, you know, describing that, hey, they can do anything in there. If the circulate main is not black, or excuse me, blank, then it's going to say circulation, and it's going to go to the next line, and it's going to do that dash all, so that's saying that everything is selected for that. Otherwise, if the circulate subs is not null, and I had to check that differently. It's interesting. This one I check against a blank. This one I check against whether it's
right, because one of them is an empty string and one of them is a null, which I'll never fully wrap my head around why an empty string and a null are different things, but okay.
Yeah. So so I check that, and then in here I'm doing a concat, doing the main label again, and this time on the next line, I'm doing a replace in here because all of your codes that might be in for that particular bit or number, it is, or the flag, I should say, they're separated by commas. So you could have, if you have 5 different subcategories under that in that grouping, they're all in there in that one field separated by commas. And so I'm replacing the comma with a line break and then adding a hyphen in front of it. And so that's what gives it that nice format, and adding that hyphen under the category and then listing each of those subcategories. And so it's formatting it for each line. So this gives me, you know, the ability to, you know, label things the way I want them to look, and highlight what I want highlighted. The nice thing about our reports, whether it's yours or mine, at the end, you can add to your where statements. So if you want to break it down by just a particular library, you can, or if you want to look for certain permissions, you can. You don't have to show everything. If you only want to have certain reports that show just the super librarians, or just the super librarians and all the what I call the critical ones, or, you know, if you're looking for particular flags, you could clarify that in the where statements.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, you could also tell it to search for a specific user ID or a specific person by name. You know,
exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, I do that when when I'm testing my report. I'll test it against my test patron, and I'll go through those flags to make sure all of that works. Especially when you've got new permissions that are cropping up, I'll limit it to that patron and then test what some of those results are. So that's my take on it.
Pretty cool. The one thing I'm thinking about doing as like the next phase of working on this is, you know, since it is possible to tell, you know, what the flags are in the borrowers column, I'm thinking of ways to do that whole if-then proposition programmatically instead of having to put the actual, you know, number, that exponent in there. If there was a way to go in there and easily, you know, plug that in programmatically, so that way you wouldn't have to keep adding on to the report, you know, each time Koha changes and adds a new set of permissions. You would just be able to dynamically get that data from the what table is that? user flags table.
Yeah, and if somebody wants to tackle that and stick it in the library, let
That'd
us
be awesome.
know. Let us know, because yeah, that's like that's one of the holy grails of the reports for us right now. It's like, this one we have to maintain, and every time a new permission comes out, we have to go in and tweak the report so it includes it. Otherwise, in my case, on my report, I don't know about yours, on my report, if I get a new number that's higher than everything else, it gives me wonky results. So so yeah, it can throw things off with those new permissions on my report. It might be different with yours because you're approaching it from the bottom and going up, where I'm going from the top down. So
Right.
Yeah, different approaches to tackling this. I am not an expert report writer by any means, and I did my best to wrap my head around the logic of permissions. It would be nice down the road, developers, if that flag field were done away with down the road. I would love to see that information, going away from this single number that we have to decipher, and have that moved over to the table, maybe. And I don't understand. I am sure that there's probably some logic behind it. Maybe it has to do because of the combination of that table and this flag number, but I don't understand why those subcategories are defined by a number rather than the category code. To me, just for simplicity, for those of us that have to write reports down the road, I get it. Maybe it made sense for you as a programmer, but for us that have to work with the end results of that, it's a little challenging. It would have made sense, more sense to me, if that number was the actual category code, and then you have all of those subcategories listed in there. That's great. And then maybe this flag is migrated over to that table with if there is no subcategory listed there, then it's assumed that that whole category is selected. That would be my take on it. But I get that going back and taking all this legacy coding and switching it over to this might be time consuming and a challenge, but you're still building off of some of this legacy stuff, and it's making it more challenging for us as we go and as it grows, for us to decipher all this information. So that's my soapbox for this topic.
Okay.
So,
well, it's a fun report no matter what. I actually kind of enjoy reporting challenges sometimes.
I enjoy it when I had the time. When I have projects piled up, then it becomes like, I'm not going to touch this.
I enjoy it when there's a really good SQL challenge, like, how do I write a report that does this? And then you figure it out. It's like, it's a big ego boost.
So let's put the challenge out to the rest of the community. If you can simplify this report and where it's dynamic and keeps up with the ongoing changes, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
So throw us your ideas, put it out there in the library, or messages, give us a comment, or email us at koha-US. Let us know if you've got a better take on this, or a better approach, or some way to understand this and make this a much simpler report. I would love it. You could see the length of our reports to try and tackle this beast.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a long report. All of the reports for this, other than the ones that are just do they have permissions or not. all of the reports are complicated.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And just a reminder, on our website, koha-us.org, you can find all of our videos, but you can also find us on YouTube at youtube.com/koha-us. There's no dash. And you'll find all our videos, plus videos from all of our meetings. And you can also like and subscribe to our particular content if you want, or you can leave comments. We love to hear comments, so please make sure that you check us out on both locations. And until next time,
See you later.
later.